Excellencies, delegates, colleagues, and friends, welcome. My name is Dmitry Grozoubinski. I'm the Executive Director of the Geneva Trade Platform, and it is my honor and my privilege to welcome you to another Geneva Trade Week. For those who have not previously attended one of our trade weeks, the purpose, what we're trying to do here is really to enhance the experience of those in Geneva and those traveling to Geneva, as well as those watching at home of the WTO Public Forum Week. This is a week in which the whole world turns its attention to trade, and many people make the journey to Geneva, which my mother would call a bit of a schlep. And we want to make sure that while you're here, you get the most out of it. So this is our attempt to do that. And as always, we partner widely to do so. Specifically, we always partner with our friends at TESS, who are thought leaders on sustainability. And we wanted to begin this year with a rich program of sustainability and environment themed events. It would perhaps be fair to say that the trade agenda is more crowded than it's ever been. There is a huge amount of issues and pressing concerns that are vying for the attention of policymakers, policy thinkers, and for capital, both financial and political. But the planet we live on can't afford to take a back seat while we sort our mess out. And the decisions that we make today about our consumption, production, investment, and trade will affect the planet for generations to come. I hope the sustainability sessions that we have over the next 2 days help to enliven and enrich the trade and sustainability conversation and inform the critical discussions both here at the public forum as well as into the future. Before I hand you over to our MC for the day, let me briefly thank the teams at TESS who made today possible, my own team at the Geneva Trade Platform, as well as the teams at the Graduate Institute, to IISD, who will be partnering with us for the second session, and to the student helpers who are working with us today. They are all charming and eminently employable, but if you decide to hire one, please wait until this week is over. We really need them for the next 4 days. So with that, let me hand you over to our wonderful moderator, Dr. Carolyn Birkbeck, who is the founder and executive director of the Forum on Trade, Environment, and the SDGs, better known as TESS, our MC for the day. Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dmitry, for the introduction. It's always a great pleasure to partner with friends, colleagues at the Geneva Trade Platform for this Geneva Trade Week day. I'm very happy to have this opening plenary and that Dmitry and colleagues thought that the sustainability issues were sufficiently important that they warranted, again, an opening plenary here. And indeed, I guess you framed it brilliantly, Dmitry, that we're all very aware of the political and economic challenges before us at this time, but it is not a time to let sustainability issues have the back seat. The planet can't afford it, and our societies and peoples can't afford that either. So on behalf of TESS, Excellencies, distinguished guests, thank you so much for joining us. Today, our goal is to take the pulse on the trade and sustainability agenda, looking to where next for international cooperation. For those of you who don't know TESS, we were established in 2021 to support a global trading system that responds to urgent global environmental crises and supports action on sustainable development priorities. So the starting point for our work is that this will require inclusive international cooperation and action. So with this in mind, we're pleased to be here today to take stock of progress and ways forward on fostering this urgently needed international cooperation. And we have to do so in a very particular context, recognizing the complexities of the current geopolitical and trade landscape. So at TESS, part of my job and our job is to be optimistic about the capacity for countries and stakeholders to work together, sometimes in huge leaps, sometimes incrementally. We can't afford to be pessimistic because we need to support countries and actors to continue to find ways to work together. So our job today is to match some of this optimism that's in our DNA at TESS with a reality check on what's really happening in the world and what that means for where success and progress is most likely. So with that in mind, I'm really delighted that we have such a broad, excellent group of speakers to join us today. We've asked them to focus on 3 questions. So first, what are the greatest trade-related challenges frustrating action to advance sustainable development? And what are the key trade-related needs arising from the impact of the triple environmental crisis? So those questions are really about why are we even talking about this? And then the second question is around the current political context. So where in this context do you see the greatest opportunities for trade cooperation to make a significant positive contribution? And here we can consider the range of possible processes and initiatives that one could imagine: bilateral, regional, plurilateral, and of course, here in the multilateral context as well. And so it's on the third question is really around this third element of the multilateral setting. So what kinds of progress and outcomes on sustainability can be envisaged at the WTO, including, for instance, in the context of the WTO reform process that is ongoing? So these are sort of the big questions facing us, but we thought it would be good to sort of take the pulse and see what people are thinking. I am very aware, even some of my panelists said this morning that they had a pessimistic outlook on this. As I said, I believe, dreaming is important, hope is important. Nothing in the world has changed without hope and without dreams and without optimism. What we also have to do is be very pragmatic, clever, and careful about how we think how best progress can be achieved, through what mechanisms, with what kinds of actors, and on different timeframes. What is clear to me, at least, is this is not a time to abandon international cooperation, no matter how hard it is. It's something that has always required a lot of work, day-to-day work. Just keeping countries in conversation is something in itself that we shouldn't underestimate the importance of. We see at present how fragile so much international cooperation is. So I would say it's a time for thinking harder about how do we reinvest and reinvigorate some of these processes, while also recognizing the shortcomings that they face. So we have a pretty packed agenda. What I wanted to do first was hear from a quite diverse group of experts who can bring different regional perspectives and also substantive perspectives to this discussion. And I'm hoping they may provoke and spur some of our thinking here. And then we have a distinguished group of ambassadors, also with different regional perspectives, different climate vulnerabilities, for example, different trade circumstances, to offer their reflections on what they think is possible. I've asked all speakers to keep their remarks to sort of 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll have a round of, hopefully, time after them for a round of conversation among the various speakers. We won't have a live Q&A, but I encourage those of you who are following online, please do send comments and questions that we could incorporate into the discussion afterwards. I also want to remind everyone that this is a live event. It's recorded, so it will be available afterwards. So let me quickly just turn to introducing the speakers. We have first Henry Gao, Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University, who landed in Geneva just an hour ago, so a stellar effort to be here this morning. We'll then have Valérie Picard, who is the Head of Trade at the International Chamber of Commerce. Trevor Sutton, who's Senior Research Associate at the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, joining us from New York online at a horrendous time of night or morning. So thank you for your commitment, Trevor, to joining us. We'll then have Gabrielle Marceau, who's known to many of you here as Honorary Professor of International Public Law and International Organization at the University of Geneva, with many years' experience on trade and sustainability, including at the WTO. We'll then turn to Elena Sancho. He's the Associate Director of the Global Trade Alert at IMD here in Geneva, in Switzerland. And then Elisa Tonda, who is Chief of the Resources and Markets Branch at UNEP. And then we will move to 4 ambassadors who will speak with us. The first is His Excellency Dr. Qobo, who is the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of South Africa to the WTO. He'll be joining us in a few minutes because there's an important good news this morning, is that the fisheries agreement at the WTO is coming into effect this morning, so it's a great day. I'm hoping some of the ambassadors will speak to that, but a positive development for sustainability and trade, and also for the multilateral system. And in that regard, I'm also delighted, Ambassador Bollinger, that you were able to make it and escape that very important meeting to be here with us. Ambassador Bollinger is the permanent representative of Switzerland to the WTO. Then we have His Excellency Mr. Antas, the ambassador from Vanuatu to international organizations here in Geneva. And then Jeremy Green, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Australia, also to the WTO. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to just switch now and turn directly over to Henry to take us off with your reflections. And I will, in my bag, I have a little 5-minute buzzer. And at 5 minutes, I'll let you know, but you have 6. But just so you're all aware. Thank you again.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's nice to be back to Geneva. In your opening remarks, you talk about the pessimism and optimism. I guess for the past few months, a lot of us in the trade world has been feeling rather pessimistic, right, about the future of trade and the sustainability. So today, let me try to lighten the mood a little bit and point out a few silver linings and intended consequences that may actually advance sustainability and trade. First is relocation closer to consumers. The Trump tariffs are already forcing many firms, both American and foreign ones, to rethink their supply chains. So some are reshoring to the US, while others are nearshoring to Mexico or Canada. The logic is simple. If the US remains the largest consumer market in the world, then producing closer to where the consumers are saves costs and also reduces risks. What's often overlooked is that in terms of the environmental dimension, today, roughly 80 to 90% of global trade by volume is carried by ships, which account for nearly 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So if more goods are produced within North America rather than shipped across the Pacific from China and Southeast Asia, that could reduce transport emissions significantly. It's a rare case where trade diversions might also contribute to climate mitigation. Second is the diversification away from the US market. The tariffs have served as a wake-up call for many countries that export primarily to the US. So they discovered that the American market now is risky, and they started to diversify, often towards regional markets around them. So actually, before coming to Geneva today, I was in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, for a meeting with the members of the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement, or the APTA. I guess probably not many of you are aware of the agreement, even though the agreement was signed some 50 years ago, but it has remained long dormant. Suddenly, because of the Trump tariffs, this sleepy agreement is alive again. So we see that the members are now discussing in Ulaanbaatar last week cooperation in e-commerce services and investment, areas where some of the members, such as India, have been reluctant to advance in the WTO. So this revival of regional integration could strengthen South trade and build resilience. It also aligns with the broader sustainable development agenda, since diversified markets can reduce vulnerability to external shocks and promote more balanced regional growth. The third and also the last point is rare earths and the supply resilience. So in response to the Trump tariffs, China has imposed countermeasures which include restricting exports of rare earths, which are vital for clean energy technologies and defense. So that has triggered a search for alternative sources in places like Indonesia, Australia, and the US itself. This has mixed implications for sustainability. On the one hand, rare earth mining in China has been notorious for its heavy pollution. If extraction shifts to countries with a stronger regulation and enforcement, such as the US or Australia, environmental outcomes might improve. On the other hand, developing multiple supply sources could also increase the total mining activity, creating redundancy and amplifying environmental impacts. So here we face a genuine trade-off: more resilient supply chains, but potentially heavier ecological footprints. So to conclude, while the tariffs clearly create risks for trade and growth, they also produce unexpected opportunities. more localized production, revived regional cooperation, and perhaps cleaner, if also more redundant resource supply chains. Trade wars are never desirable, but sometimes may shake up entrenched patterns in ways that can open space for more sustainable pathways. Also, we hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry, for getting us off onto a good provocative start about where we can look for some silver linings in some of this trade uncertainty at present. I'm going to turn directly now to Trevor Sutton, who's online with us. Might just take a second to patch him in.
I'm here if you can hear me.
Brilliant, we can hear you. Good morning, Trevor.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I have a workshop in Washington tomorrow, but I will be in Geneva on Thursday and Wednesday in case anyone has intense disagreements with which I have to say, in which case, please come find me and be nice. And it is about 5 in the morning here. So I do apologize if I've fallen a little short in the standards of coherence I set myself, but it's great to be here. I guess I have the somewhat easy job as someone sitting in the United States of observing some of the challenges facing the trade and sustainability interface right now. As I'm sure not lost on you, we have seen an administration that has evolved not simply from being hostile to the renewable project, the clean energy transition project in the United States, and hostile to the norms of the international trade system as they've existed for some time, but also is now seeking to leverage its newfound powers to impose tariffs on partners for virtually no justification at virtually any moment, to in fact try to further an anti-renewable energy, anti-clean transition agenda in the wider world. We are seeing that, for example, in its response to the IMO net zero declaration. It may, if you don't follow that space, you may have missed that the United States is threatening tariffs, it is threatening visa cancellations, it is threatening port fees on any country that endorses or participates in that scheme to bring greater sustainability to a sector that has long flown under the radar as a significant contributor of anthropogenic emissions. I'm sure many in this room have also observed that its position in the plastics treaty has grown hostile, and it has thrown its lot in with the fossil fuel producing countries in seeking the weakest possible or no possible regulation of production and trade in plastic materials. And then finally, in its efforts to produce deals, quote unquote, that are sort of neither fish nor flesh nor fowl, I suppose, for those of us who are more familiar with FTAs and other sorts of economic and trade partnerships, to insert mandatory purchases of fossil fuel goods from the United States as a condition of the tariff reductions or other terms of the deal. We saw that in the US-EU deal, and I don't think that will be the last time. So that obviously poses some pretty significant challenges to, I think, building a global trade system, certainly one that includes the world's largest economy that is aligned with sustainability goals. If there's a silver lining to be drawn with that, it's that it has prompted a very lively discussion on the center and on the left in the United States about what kind of trade policy we want to follow this. There are some folks that believe the word tariff will be a 4-letter word by the time this administration leaves office, and are already making the case for a reversion to a more norms and rules-based approach to trade, albeit with a focus on plurilateral arrangements more than the WTO. And I think that's just a reflection of where the center of gravity is in these issues is in the US. There are also pockets of hope even within the Republican Party in the US. There's a senator from Louisiana who has for the second time introduced a kind of border carbon adjustment mechanism, albeit one not not linked to a domestic carbon price, but that is nonetheless trying to follow the EU in better internalizing the social externalities of carbon emissions and the price of traded goods. Where I see broader opportunity personally is that in the face of a revisionist United States in the trade space, I think this is prompting more creative thinking about what kind of plurilateral and bilateral partnerships countries can pursue among themselves that are more sustainability and climate centered. I'm of course very encouraged by the ACCTS that New Zealand, Costa Rica, Switzerland, and other countries have pursued. I have my skepticisms about how that model could be applied more broadly, but I think it shows a degree of creative reflection about how climate can be centered in a trade arrangement. I think that it hopefully will open up, I think, more creative thinking around the use of open plurilaterals at the WTO as a way to sort of address some of these difficulties about changing countries' initial commitments to the WTO in a very changed world. And about potentially reviving an environmental goods agreement, potentially one that is more focused on the challenge of climate change and clean energy goods. And finally, I feel optimistic that for all the upheaval in the trade space, there has been, I think, it has, I think, made people a little bit more creative in thinking about how to structure trade partnerships other than conventional FTAs in a way that advances sustainable development goals. And here I'm thinking about looking at trade not simply as a mean of reducing barriers to trade, but also as a way of expanding the policy space, particularly of developing countries to pursue climate-aligned industrial policy, which, according to a lot of academic literature, is more likely to deliver the sort of level of emissions reductions we need rather than simply tariff reductions alone. So I've probably gone over 5 minutes there, but happy to take any questions later or if anything I have said strikes you as outlandish. Again, please come find me in a few days. I'd love to chat.
Sorry, very lucid for this early in the morning, Trevor. Thank you very much, and great to have a perspective from someone who's really working closely in the United States to track these issues. That's always useful for those of us working in Geneva. So I'm now going to turn over to Gabrielle Marceau, who will offer her reflections.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for inviting me here, and good morning, everyone. As you know, I left the WTO, I retired in March, so now I'm a bit more free to say what I want. I think Caroline mentioned that I was pessimistic. I am, and in the first part, I'll follow a little bit what the previous Trevor speaker said, and my conclusion will be that it's half and half. So I woke up this morning and I saw that I think Switzerland just signed a carbon agreement with, I think it's Norway or Denmark. So I thought, oh, at least some countries continue. But I had a dinner not long ago and someone from WIPO said they committed not to refer to the goal, Sustainable Development Goal, because it's not in their treaty. I heard the same from World Bank that they committed not to use the word climate in their publication. So, of course, I read this week in the Financial Times where US threatened that all the EU sustainable regulation is basically only restriction on trade. So this is what is discouraging after 30 years of efforts to integrate trade and environment. And my first point is that we should not underestimate how serious and dangerous and sad the situation is in the current context. Now, is it fatal? It means more work on environment per se. That is more work to prove and bring evidence that dealing with sustainable trade will help human beings, that dealing with sustainable trade will help trade. Maybe less perfect agreement. I used to tell my students, all these new mini deals and GSI, you can be very rigorous and say this is not proper legally, but you can also look at it, and it's going to be the only way out, I think, for some years, as efforts to push an agenda and develop wording mechanism that will be used voluntarily in regional trade agreement or otherwise. But we should not associate the rule of law with anything against flexibility. And the focus should be on pragmatic and flexible approach rather than perfectly sort of traditional legal instruments. Things are possible if we put less emphasis, and this will be my last comment, on, and it's funny because I'm a lawyer, on the law. What I think the focus should be is on efficacy, efficiency, and realization. So, for instance, in the context of just an example, dispute settlement, I suggested that we give up binding concept and we go for advisory opinion like the International Court of Justice does. Because in an advisory opinion, you don't massacre the law. The parties are not bound by it. They can set it aside, but the analysis remains correct. So instead of distorting and pretending there's no rule, what we need to look at is looking at the rule of law as a goal rather than absolute result. After Seattle, I remember when the DG at the time took us in the room W and told us not to cry too much. The world is not over after Seattle. Well, countries will not stop trading. We saw it during the pandemic. Trade is much more than import-export. It's also cross-border. And I remember when I was explaining to students that in Switzerland, 30 or 40% of the nurses come from outside, and they had developed those green passage. And I told them, this is trade. This is trade in services. And so we have to look at it from this perspective. Finally, thanks to those who work like crazy, not only the ambassadors here in the room, my previous DG, we saw fishery coming out. I encourage you to look at the text written, published by Froman, the previous USTR, a strong believer in trade, where he talks about the need to maintain cooperation, but loosen things. Because if you don't loosen, there's a risk that it explodes. Let's loosen it for a while, continue to develop thinking and improve narrative on evidence of the benefit of environment to save sustainable development. The great thing is that for WTO, sustainable development is in the preamble. It's there. So there's no argument, oh, this is in the UN, we don't want the UN. This is right in the center of WTO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. Really delighted to have your insights. And I think indeed, I probably shouldn't have characterized you as being pessimistic per se, but I think this is the challenge we face, is how to remain optimistic and forward-looking while recognizing that the situation is dangerous and sad, as
Very
you said.
dangerous.
So that's a good framing for some of the discussion going forward. So I just wanted to acknowledge quickly Ambassador Qobo. Thank you for joining us. We're just moving through the first part of the panel, and then we'll move over to you. So I'm going to turn next to Elena Sancho, who's Associate Director of Global Trade Alert, which many of you are probably aware of as an amazing resource for the trade community. Over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good morning, everyone. So we meet today in a moment where trade and sustainability are caught in a paradigm shift. It was not long ago, in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we saw governments committing to their industrialization strategies to advancing on the decarbonization goals. However, today what we're seeing is that the world is changing and we're going in a different direction. Geopolitical concerns and national security are taking over and dominating the trade agenda. So what this is making is that it's pushing sustainability to a second place. I think that the greatest challenge we are facing today is to ensure that sustainability is not being pushed down the list of priorities when it comes to the trade agenda. And so, since this panel is about setting the scene, I thought I would share with you some trends that the Global Trade Alert team has been actually seeing in the last few years. And let me start first with climate change. What we've seen is that after the invasion of Ukraine, And then later with the growing US-China rivalry, things have been moving away from the sustainability agenda. And this has culminated with the new Trump administration, as everyone here is saying. Just to give you some facts, what we saw is that if we compared data from 2024 with that of 2025, and we focus on government rationales related to climate change mitigation, the data shows that in the last year, there's been a drop of 70%. Then if we look, on the other hand, at national security, governments are really justifying the adoption of trade policy on these grounds, and the numbers have increased by 128%. So it's okay, don't worry. I continue. I think this is actually a very good point. And so if we think now, we move on to pollution, I also would like to think about or give you some trends on plastic trade. And also strikingly, what we found in the team is that 6 out of the top 13 exporters of plastics are actually giving subsidies to export for the community. And then at the same time, what we're seeing is that when it comes to domestic subsidies, we looked at the trend before the 5 years before the pandemic, and now we compare that with the data on the 5 years after the pandemic, we see that domestic subsidies to promote the production of plastics have increased by 128%. So it's also a very big increase there. Unfortunately, also when we looked at biodiversity, we were also a bit shocked by the lack of activity related to this topic when it comes to trade policy. And so what we thought is that recent major policies are also very complex. We have, for instance, the EU deforestation regulation, which actually raises questions as to its feasibility and its cost for developing countries. So yes, I'm giving you a bit of a very doom scenario, but I want to close with some positive notes in this direction. I think that, yes, there's a big challenge. I think everyone here acknowledges that we need to make sure, and the whole community needs to work to ensure that sustainability is not left behind when it comes to the trade agenda. But at the same time, as Gabrielle just said, I think there's an opportunity for everyone if we embark on pragmatic cooperation and we embark more on the idea of coalitions of the willings. We've seen already that this is working when it comes to critical raw materials, when it comes to even subsidies on plastic, right? So hopefully we will be seeing more of these going on, and we end up with, sustainability not being left behind. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And it would be great to maybe at the end we can show people where we can get the link to some of the data that you will produce on looking at the rationale. Go ahead.
Definitely.
Okay, super. I'm going to turn now to Elisa Tonda from UNEP to provide her remarks as well. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ambassadors, colleagues, friends. It's really a pleasure to be here today and have a discussion on this subject that I would really want to twist from the positive and constructive side. In the moments where we're discussing now, our organization, UNEP, is at the center of discussing its new medium-term strategy for the next 4 years. And the core of it, and Caroline, you had alluded to at the beginning, to the triple crisis of climate change, nature loss, and land degradation, pollution and waste being what we are working towards addressing. And frankly, I don't see this challenge being successfully addressed unless we add on the table the ingredient of a trade that is helping us address those challenges and is helping us moving forward in achieving sustainable development objectives at the same time. We are starting from a viewpoint where for many of us working on those challenges, we do perceive a misalignment of objectives when we compare when some of the environmental policies are heading to, some of the industrial policies are heading to, some of the trade policies are heading to. We are still seeing, and some of the recent reports coming out are still very clearly highlighting that for many environmental goods, solar technologies, solar panel, wind turbines, or more sustainable alternatives and products, they are faced with higher tariffs compared with less sustainable alternatives. We are seeing that the flow of secondary materials in the economy, according to some of the recently produced studies, are actually decreasing in percentage rather than increasing. We are also frequently confronted when engaging with partners in countries with questions around the fact that being able to show and demonstrate meeting sustainability objectives is costly for enterprises. There have been some allusions to the current geopolitical tensions and how they are affecting the willingness to invest into more sustainable alternatives. This comes also with a continued gap in capacity and infrastructures of some of the countries that would be keen and ready to move towards more sustainable products, to embark in that journey, because they don't have the capacity to certify products, they don't have capacity to demonstrate they meet standards, they don't have access to technologies that would help them shift to greener and more sustainable. But in that context, what we keep on hearing is a strong call to really address those challenges, a strong willingness to be at the forefront and continuing on the ground to find solution. What we are hearing as call, and that we believe can really be the center of our efforts, is how can we create clearer alignments with the environment objectives, be those framed in the Paris Agreement, in the biodiversity framework, in the global framework of chemicals, and the trade and industrial objectives. How can we, on the ground, experience those alignment of agreements in different sectors? So, Caroline, we are frequently approached on how can we bring that convergence, that alignment in sectors such as textile, where there's huge opportunity for sustainability and circularity that are currently not fully exploited, and where at times trade and circularity in the textile sector is actually seen as a challenge for the industrial development of countries. We are very much brought on the topic of this conversation when we're talking about critical energy transition minerals and how trade can create opportunities for those resource-rich countries to really take advantage of the benefit sharing across the entire system, so that this helps them move forward in their industrial and their development objectives. We are confronted with similar questions on, again, on the ground, how can we make that happen across plastic value chains, and show with evidence that there is a possible point of convergence between environment, economic objectives, and trade objectives. So for me, the really core point is that trade should be the ingredient in the transformation of these that within UNEP we call high impact sector. I like more calling them as sectors where we can really achieve multiple benefits in the context of the transformation. Cooperation will be central, and I'm seeing in regional context a lot of efforts materializing. I've heard reference to what is happening in the Asian region. We are working very closely with countries in Latin America that are looking together at regional eco-labeling scheme to foster trade and exchanges within the region. But I think that one of the core efforts that we will need to do is to have a very strong narrative that will help us explain how meeting those environmental goals, those environmental objectives are good for businesses, are good for the economy, are good for employment, because these will help us advance a positive conversation of innovation and of opportunities. So in these context is really very much where we are looking forward to joining hands with partners such as yourself, Caroline, and your team, Dmitry and his team, to bring forward those positive messages and to bring forward those positive evidence. Caroline, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elisa. Also, there was a nice bridge between what Gabrielle had said earlier about the importance of evidence in driving a focus on what's possible. And I think your spin a little away from impacts and more to what are the benefits or opportunities that could emerge out of these things. I mean, obviously, there's an opportunity cost to not acting, right? Which is also something that is not high enough in people's minds. So that brings us to the end of the panel part of our discussion. And so now I'm really excited to hear from our four government representatives here, some of their reflections. So just to remind ourselves, we heard quite a lot about the challenges at hand, the uncertainty of the trading landscape. One of my reflections is that at a time of uncertainty, we perhaps need even more leadership than in other, we talk about a shift in leadership or vacuums or movements in leadership. The question for me is, where will the leadership come from governments who care about sustainability and ensuring that this remains central to the trade agenda? And here, I think at TESS, we're very much interested in all three of those dimensions of sustainability. So the environment, the social, and then economic, as reflected in the preamble, the WTO agreement. So that's a question, I guess, back to our ambassadors here, is what can we do to keep these issues at the forefront of government's mind at a time that's very, very complex? And hopefully what could be done in the WTO context as well. So I'm going to start with His Excellency Dr. Qobo, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of South Africa to the WTO. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, thanks, Carolyn, and to every participant. I was just still trying to catch my breath, and I'm sorry I came in late. You're quite right. A number of, at least those that I've listened to, have alluded to some of the challenges that we all face in the global environment, largely due to the rise in restrictive trade measures and increasingly the use of industrial policy measures with growth in subsidies that go into areas that are likely to have a spillover effects on other countries, developing countries, likely to have a negative environment, a negative effect rather on environment, especially if you look at fuel subsidies. Some of the work undertaken by credible international organizations such as your OECD have shown that governments, especially around 2022, the figure, one figure I saw in the OECD suggests that about $1.5 trillion is the amount governments have paid to these subsidies to support fossil fuel subsidies. Now, I mean, these are big numbers, and when you're confronted with big numbers, it kind of numbs at times the normative nerve, because behind these numbers you have activities that are reversing some of the work done to promote sustainability, and you also affect at the same time the economic, socio-economic interests of other countries. So these are not neutral. These are very these have effect. Now, I think someone said, I don't know whether it was, I think it was Gabrielle mentioned that the WTO already in its institutional architecture has an inbuilt commitment to sustainable development, and this is very clear in the preamble of the WTO. It's very emphatic, but also it does make a point that due regard should be given to different levels of development of different countries. So we've got to keep this in mind that there is a shared goal to promote a better co-reinforcing in a positive way a relationship between trade and environment to achieve some of the climate objectives that we all believe in, but also the fact that, or rather the reality that countries are at different levels of development. They have different capabilities, they have different fiscal capacities to compensate the losers. So this oftentimes is almost heard as if it's a trade-off. It's a complementarity that these things go together. Sustainability as three pillars: environment, social, and economic. At the WTO, quite a bit of work has been undertaken, and I'm not going to take a lot of time here. My colleague, Ambassador Erwin Bollinger, and I'm not saying this because it's here, it's in my notes. He's championed the Environment Week. And I think he's made that program very vibrant. I have participated in some of the sessions, but also sat in one of the meetings of the city, the Committee on Trade and Environment. And this is a ground-up process where members themselves identify what it is that they want to talk about during the Environment Week. And it's attract delegations from capitals. My capital has not participated as yet, but I'm on their case. And I've met participants from all over the world, which suggests to me that the discussions on trade and environment are very important in the WTO. However, we still, I think, a long way to go. And maybe before touching on this, there are specific areas where I think there are overlapping interests between governments, civil society, and industry, especially if you think about interoperability of standards. And here, the example is that of the carbon border adjustment measure. Some of the concerns, or some of now, with the spillover, possible constraining spillover effects of measures that are undertaken in one jurisdiction but have extraterritorial effect. Some, they concern development. Others are very specific to environment. My own take and what I think is missing is that we have not yet established in the WTO context a rulemaking negotiating platform on trade and environment. And this is very difficult, and it's going to be more difficult under the current geopolitical environment characterized by trade frictions among nations. But it's something I think we should keep on trying to promote. There are also related areas that, for an example, early this year, Brazil championed sustainable agriculture. So there are questions of sustainability as they link to agriculture and trade. They also linkage with elements that are of immediate effect to many African countries and many developing countries around the world, which is sustainability, agriculture, and food security. So I think personally, this area is very ripe for a more focused discussion at the WTO to identify areas where we could, and the word rulemaking is pretty strong, and I share the point made by Gabrielle early on about thinking about the tension between hard law and soft law in the WTO, or hard decisions, hard agreements versus enabling type agreements. So I think this is a space where possibly there could be an opportunity for us to have a shared conversations about what we can take forward as the WTO members. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and for taking up this idea. I like the idea of enabling agreements and hard agreements. That's maybe a useful framing going forward as well. Ambassador Bollinger, over to you, please.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank TESS and the Geneva Trade Platform for having organized this important event at the start of the Geneva Trade Week. I think it's a very good start after as has been mentioned by some others, we have already had a good start with the entry into force ceremony this morning on the Fish 1 agreement, which is a milestone agreement, and maybe also, hopefully, could also be something like a turning point, showing that WTO members are able to agree and to conclude agreements that also go beyond purely trade issues, as we have seen in Fish 1, just to mention that. And thank you very much for the roundtable with experts. I really was listening carefully to all of you and took some notes, because I believe it's important that we exchange not only among governments, but also with experts from different organizations and with different backgrounds. Now to come back to the questions, the guiding questions that you put on paper. To start with the first question, I think it's, in my view, difficult to pinpoint which trade-related challenges are preventing us from advancing in the promotion of sustainable development, especially as members, and we heard that before, and countries have different interests and different needs that lead them to take different positions, and these positions are sometimes also very difficult to reconcile. We also heard from my good friend Ambassador Qobo that we also have tendencies. We had recently unilateral trade measures, sometimes also in guise of environmental objectives, then also call for policy space, and then also the competition for rare minerals and other things, just to mention a few, that makes it difficult. We have an ongoing fragmentation of the global trade order, which all lead to a situation that makes it difficult to agree easily to something. As mentioned, the world has unfortunately changed compared to only a couple of years ago, and members' ambitions are put under great pressure by the current geopolitical context. Let's be frank, we all are forced to reassess our priorities in these challenging times, and we see that also back home, that certain questions are being put on the back burner, and more urgent questions are at the forefront. But we all agree that trade must be part of the solution, and I also would mention, in my view, that the biggest challenge maybe is that we cannot stay in inaction. We have to be active, because if we don't move, that maybe is the biggest threat that we are not active in fields and areas that are important also for next generations and for the continuation of trade, but also of aspects that go beyond trade. Now, we all agree that trade must be part of the solution for the triple environmental crisis. This forces us to show readiness to tackle the problems caused by trade and not look away, pretending that there's nothing that we can do. In my opinion, trade cooperation will be more important than ever, because it can help us to understand the divergent needs that I mentioned at the outset and draw inspiration from each other to adopt the best possible climate measures. In other words, these challenging times require us to be pragmatic and to work together. And as I mentioned before, and some others mentioned also, we need this exchange with the outside world. We should do that more often. And we are, especially Switzerland, also we are doing that at home. And we believe that this has to be done even more frequently in the context of the WTO as well. In this context, the space for dialogue and deliberation, as we have it here in TESS, between different groups and breaking down silos is important and crucial. From a climate angle, there's rising attention on trade in successive COPs. We saw that at the last COPs, and I also understand that on the Brazilian COP presidency, the COP 30, it seems that trade is also a focus, the intersection of trade and climate change at COP 30. There will be a meeting with the COP 30 presidency this week, and we will certainly hear more during this public forum. At the same time, from the trade angle in Geneva, we have a strong engagement and interest of WTO members on climate issues. And there I get to where I come from, namely as chairman of the WTO Committee on Trade and Environment. We have looked into different topics. We had a lot of members' engagements, a lot of papers during the last 2 years. I've been now chairing this committee for the last 1.5 years. I'm very happy to do so, and I see an engagement despite the difficult situation. We had, among other work that we undertook in the Committee on Trade and Environment, thematic sessions on different topics that we choose together. One of them was were the topics on trade-related climate measures. We had 2 specific thematic discussions, especially on methodologies that are used to measure emissions embodied in products. This sounds very technical, but it turns to be a major pain for businesses, and sometimes and it's important that we find a common solution to work on these issues. There's a great deal of fragmentation between countries and regions in climate measures affecting trade, and at the root of these frictions are often different and incompatible ways of counting greenhouse gas emissions. So we are looking at that without creating new rules, but to see whether we can have a common understanding of these trade-related climate measures, and also maybe look at best practices just to help members to come along with these issues. Other topics that we have engaged, there was a thematic session on technology transfer related to trade and environment. We held fruitful discussions in April, got a lot of insights, case studies, and there will be more work if members wish so. So as always, the ball is in the field of the members. And then to mention the third topic that we chose to go into more depth is discussion around sustainable agriculture. We will build on what has been discussed, and that's a happy coincidence that we discussed with under Brazilian leadership in the General Council at a thematic session that is scheduled in November on what can be done without duplicating work in the field of sustainable agriculture. This afternoon, I will have a meeting with the 2 moderators from Barbados and the United Kingdom to see how they want to plan this event. They already were in contact with members since July. Maybe also taking now at the end of my short intervention, a slightly larger view. I think it's also important that we look at possibilities to be able to integrate agreements, integrate rules that we have decided into the WTO framework. I think of the investment facilitation agreement, which might also have an influence on investments for environmental to look for at the environmental objectives. But that could also be the case if we find a solution, how to integrate these bilateral agreements into the WTO, to look at the agreements that also include environmental aspects. And there are some that we are working within the different initiatives at the WTO. Thank you very much again for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that review and also for providing an insight into the work that you're leading and overseeing in the context of the Committee on Trade and Environment. So I'm now going to turn over to Ambassador Santas, who's the permanent representative, Antas, permanent representative of Vanuatu to international organizations here in Geneva. And I was just, as I was about to introduce you, I was reminded that Ambassador Bollinger mentioned that for many countries, they're moving to more, what they may consider to be more urgent questions. But we also face the reality that for many of the world's most vulnerable, climate vulnerable countries, including SIDS and many, many LDCs and many parts of a whole range of developing, developed countries, these are urgent issues. The climate crisis poses direct impacts on economic and social welfare. And so it's highly consequential, as is nature loss and so on, to the long run prospects of economies. So hoping that you might be able to shed insight on how you see this from your national perspective.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good morning, good afternoon already to colleagues and friends. We are sitting here in this room, all having the same objectives, wanting to speak for our environment of the world. Those of us who were involved in the plastics negotiations last month, and also we read, last week or 2 weeks ago, that the United States has announced that those who are voting for the measures on fossil fuels used in the maritime industry may be punished for their voting for that particular resolution. So we can see that on the issue of environment, particularly on the fossil fuels, which we know contribute big time to our challenge in the environment space, there is a huge influence in the way we do our work at the multilateral level concerning our environment. And we were reminded by Elisa on the three issues of climate change, nature loss, and land degradation. But I want to speak today on the challenge of climate change and trade and sustainable value chain. And I want to, when I speak on this topic, I want to bring us together today, namely taking the pulse of trade and the sustainable development agenda. What is the next step for international cooperation? The first thing that came to mind was climate change and the ICJ advisory opinion that was recently released on the 23rd of July. One might wonder, what has this got to do with our topic? This is a very good question, and it has a very simple answer. Because one, sitting here today on behalf of the Republic of Vanuatu and many countries in the world, whether you're developing, SIDS, LDC, we all have a long history of being at the forefront for advocating for climate justice and international cooperation in the face of existential threats posed by climate change. Every year, our economies face devastating impacts on homes, infrastructure, and livelihoods. Our agriculture, fisheries, and tourism, the pillars of our economy and the backbone of our food security, are at risk. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it is an existential threat. Small island states like Vanuatu contribute minimally to global emissions, yet we bear the disproportionate risks. And as I said earlier, in July, the International Court of Justice issued a landmark advisory opinion affirming that states have a legal obligation under international law to combat climate change and to protect both current and future generations. This unanimous decision underscores that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a fundamental right. And I started off my presentation by saying that the issue of plastics and fossil fuels, I'm saying again that those countries, our friends, who are not taking that responsibility, in our view, the ICJ's advisory opinion is that you have to take responsibility for your actions or lack thereof. Now let's return to today's topic. I took the time to talk about climate change and the ICJ advisory opinion because trade is essential to our survival and development. But it is increasingly threatened by the effects of climate change. Disruptions to transport, high shipping costs, and the limited infrastructure make access to global markets challenging for small island nations. We urge the international community to adopt fair, inclusive trade policies and recognize the vulnerabilities of SIDS, including technical assistance, preferential access, and support for climate resilient exports. Trade must not just be about growth, it must be about sustainability and resilience. Building sustainable value chain is critical. We are committed to climate smart agriculture, sustainable fisheries, and renewable energy solutions. By investing in these areas, we can protect our environment, create decent jobs, empower women, and preserve our culture. Our approach is not only about economic development, but it is about creating value chains that respect the people and the planet that we live in. We also recognize the need for international cooperation. Partnership in technology transfer, investment, and capacity building are essential to enable SIDS to develop resilient, sustainable, and inclusive value chains. These partnerships must prioritize local communities, ensure gender equality, and safeguard traditional knowledge and biodiversity. Climate change, climate action, trade, and sustainable value chains are not separate agendas. They are deeply connected. By investing in renewable energy, physical infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, and eco-friendly fisheries, we can turn climate vulnerability into an opportunity for resilient development, economic growth, and sustainable future. We heard this morning, Ambassador Msukisi has just come from WTO. The fisheries subsidies agreement is coming into force today. Hopefully it's already in force as we speak. But phase 2 of the fisheries subsidies agreement, as my colleague Jeremy was just telling me, needs a lot more work. And the work lies ahead of us. So with respect to the question 2 that you posed here, and I refer to the question, in the current political context, where are the greatest opportunities for trade cooperation? We heard some of the challenges earlier this morning. And I would like to say that multilateralism, the WTO or the UN, is being threatened now as we speak. Vanuatu is a small island state. We depend on the multilateral system. We want it to work. And we call on everyone to support the desire for multilateralism to work. Because we need it, we need the rule of law, we need the issue of transparency and predictability, or we can fall back to our own bilateral or regional agreements. For some from Vanuatu, from the Pacific side, we have a good agreement amongst ourselves, Pacific Islands, as well as with Australia and New Zealand in the PESA Plus, which we value those agreements very much. They're a very valuable part of our work at home. We stand ready to contribute, to share our experiences and collaborate, but we cannot do it alone. We need a global solidarity, predictable climate finance, technology support, and fair trade frameworks that allow vulnerable nations to thrive. Colleagues, the challenges are immense, but the opportunity is clear. Together, we can ensure that vulnerable nations like Vanuatu are not left behind, that our value chains are sustainable, and that our people have the resilience to face a changing climate. Let us act with agency, fairness, and solidarity so that together we can build a resilient, sustainable, and just world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Antas, also for reflecting on the relevance of the recent ICJ advisory opinion. I think that's something that's useful for many in the trade community to explore and understand more about what that says and what that means for international cooperation on these topics, and also for underlining the importance of climate resilient development as part of this wider discussion around trade and sustainability. I'm going to turn to our final speaker, Jeremy Green from the Australian mission to the WTO. Over to you.
Thanks to all the speakers, to the experts, and to the ambassadors who've spoken before me. Advantage of being the ninth speaker, I suppose, is that I get to reflect on what others have said and try and respond. But it also means I was busy crossing out things so that I didn't repeat what others have said. So I'll try and do my best in the following 5 minutes to add some value to this conversation. I wanted to make the point at the outset that for Australia, working with the Pacific is of high priority in terms of addressing the impacts in particular of climate change. And for us, that means a commitment to achieving our emissions reduction target and stepping up global action to assist us to do so. You know, as many would be aware, Australia, together with the Pacific, is bidding to host the next COP after Brazil, and we're committed to that bid. It's recognition that the Pacific is in fact in the front line of the current crisis. For the same reasons, we were pleased and proud to join the Pacific in co-sponsoring the Vanuatu-led UNGA resolution requesting the ICJ advisory opinion. But what does that all mean in practice? I mean, from Australia's perspective, prospects for strong ambition in terms of climate reduction mitigation globally depends on how we frame it. There are many ways of framing it, and Ambassador Antas has pointed out the challenges and the issues around livelihoods, the existential challenge for not just Pacific, but for other developing countries. But we also think it's useful to frame it based on economic opportunity. So from our perspective, climate change mitigation and the transition to net zero presents real economic opportunity for members, WTO members, but countries more broadly. In other words, our policy approach to these challenges can boost both economic and trade competitiveness, as well as delivering on climate ambition. Carolyn has heard me say a few times and hates me saying this about the need for coherence in this space, but the reality is that we do think that we can have our cake and eat it too if policies are designed carefully. We have progressed this through bilateral and regional engagements, including through green economy agreements with Korea and Singapore, amongst others. But it's clear that multilateral and broader plurilateral efforts have a key role to play to scale up the sort of action that we are looking for. Whilst we would love to see rules, and Australia is normally at the forefront of pushing for ambition here at the WTO and other places, we do think that climate action is urgent. And so there are places to start that are somewhat less than rules. We only saw this morning, as great as it was to see the fisheries subsidies agreement enter into force, as people know, that's been a 20+ year process. And as Ambassador Antas said, the work doesn't stop there. There's a critical extra part dealing with disciplines on overcapacity and overfishing that we need to get to. So developing rules is critical, but it's also, we have to recognize that there's a time frame involved for climate action. From our perspective, the WTO can play a role in delivering on agreed outcomes, on transparency, cooperation, and regulatory coherence, the sort of soft law guidelines that Gabrielle and that Ambassador Qobo referred to. Things that would help businesses in the first instance, including MSMEs, navigate complex markets, regulatory policies, net zero targets. This is not going to be easy. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that more and more climate measures will inevitably impact trade, and more trade measures will inevitably impact climate. It's not surprising, trade measures carry embedded emissions. This is why, from our perspective, a key area that we think is feasible before MC14, before the 14th Ministerial Conference, is prospective international cooperation on developing non-binding guidance on methodologies for measuring embedded emissions. And that's something that Ambassador Bollinger mentioned earlier. If I can just at the end also reference one other point where we think international work, and particularly at the WTO, is critical, and that is around the issue of subsidies that has been raised by a number of speakers. We heard about the fish subsidies agreement, we've heard about plastics and about fossil fuel subsidies, but let me also add, as you would expect, agricultural subsidies to the mix. There is a significant amount of research from the FAO, OECD, and others about the impact of trade distorting agricultural support and the fact that it accelerates environmental harm and increases greenhouse gas emissions. So from our perspective, agricultural trade reform is also critical in terms of meeting both environmental subsidies, so sustainability, and the sustainable development needs of members. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you for helping us to conclude with some very concrete ideas or updates on ways forward that members are thinking about on some of these topics in the WTO context. So I'm blessed with having 9 speakers and 9 minutes to go. So I'm going to go in reverse and ask each of the speakers, starting with Henry, just if you could give your one reflection on a point of light that you would take from this discussion about a way forward that maybe you didn't have before you came in, or a great reflection that a colleague has made where say, yes, this is something that we can and could work on going forward. Over to you first, Henry, and we just have like a minute each.
Sure. I think I was surprised to find that today the atmosphere is more amicable than I initially thought, because, taking back to Gabrielle's earlier point about, soft agreements about all these GSIs, being from outside of Geneva, I always hear about a confrontation, on some of these issues, right? But today, I think the atmosphere that I can feel is actually quite positive. It looks like everybody's willing to work together. I don't know whether that has something to do with the environment we are in, the fact that we all face one common threat, the US, right, in such a way, in a certain way. So, but I think the feeling I get is very positive. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, over to you, Trevor, where it must be almost breakfast time in New York.
Almost. Yeah, I can't wait till my partner's alarm goes off and I can make some coffee. But I am similarly heartened, and actually, Henry, really, you beat me to the punch. I've actually been tremendously encouraged by the level of resourcefulness that I'm hearing in this room, and also in my conversations with non-US actors in the space about the need to be creative, the need to be flexible, and the continual recognition that trade has to be part of the solution to building a sustainable future and meeting the existential challenge of climate crisis. I think there's increasing recognition that we're going to need to pursue this along multiple fronts simultaneously. At the WTO, I was encouraged to hear Ambassador Bollinger's focus on interoperability, particularly when it comes to measuring the embedded content of carbon. I think that's going to be really important. But I was also encouraged to hear about the various plurilateral and bilateral efforts going on to incorporate climate-aligned trade norms into what we might call a somewhat fragmented architecture that could nonetheless, I think, be built up into a future global architecture that is more fit for purpose. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Trevor. I'll go next to Gabrielle, please.
Thank you. I don't have much to add. I was quite impressed by the intervention of the 4 governmental representatives and those before. I would only emphasize 2 points. One that was already made, but the need for soft cooperation, but also with all actors, and I would say in particular business, because when it will be time to push US or other non-strongly interested participant, the business can help smaller government convince bigger government and can help also demonstrate, or what I was calling for, my second point, evidence that dealing with climate will bring money. Dealing with climate will facilitate business and will help, of course, sustainable development, but it is a real issue. It's not just because we love flowers and we love environment, it's because we need it to survive and expand economically. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I go to Anna and then Elisa.
Thank you. So I was also very impressed, and I take it that these positive outcomes that we're talking here. I think yes, of course, there's this geopolitical context brings many challenges, but as we're seeing here, there's commitment and intention towards advancing in the sustainability sphere when it comes to trade policy. So I also really liked all these comments on the pragmatic approach to achieving soft agreements, and this also in the idea of also bringing together many actors. So it's not just about governments negotiating. No, sometimes it might take long, but it's also maybe we've seen also initiatives at the city level. Mega cities are also betting on sustainability. We see firms. So if we actually manage to get many stakeholders involved in the discussion, I think many more small agreements will be made, but this will contribute gradually to more progress in the area.
Thank you. And I think that one of the aspects that was not crossing my mind before being here is that one of the options in the complexity that we're living might be that we freeze. While what I've heard today is that actually it's that same complexity that triggers us to maintain ourselves active. And maybe in different ways, in creative ways. But this is something that stayed with me from all the interventions, Caroline.
Thank you, Elisa. So I just wanted to offer just a minute each to each of the ambassadors, and I'm sure you have busy schedules, so then we'll need to close. But maybe starting with Ambassador Qobo.
No, thanks, Carolyn. This should be very important for us to be here and to listen to the different views because we exist in this cloistered space in the WTO where we listen to our own voices. I think I agree with the points made by colleagues who try to, because this will have to find a way of going back, and I think your platform does provide a soft landing for some of these in the sort of discussions that happen, the thematic discussions that happen, and can agree more with Jeremy on we can do something in the WTO. We don't need to launch an environmental round to have serious conversations on the intersection at the intersection of trade and environment issues, things like your transparency measures, sectoral issues. Some could relate to shared standards, methodologies, building on the conversation on sustainable agriculture. I mean, some of the things that Australia has come up with are very interesting on environmentally harmful subsidies. The circular economy practices, there could be many possibilities of specific real aspects over which there could be, convergence on shared interests, because these are public goods in a sense. So let me leave it at that. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ambassador Bollinger, please.
Thank you a lot. And first of all, thank you for this very meaningful and very constructive discussion we just had. And I learned a lot by the experts and also by colleagues. My takeaways, I would say, are on the one side, there's an urgency that we act, but there's also willingness. We have to focus on what is possible. And one solution or one possibility would be to look into soft law solutions, more cooperative solutions. I also believe that we have to talk and exchange with not only with the like-minded, but also with those that are not always like-minded, because otherwise we'll not be able to find solutions. And everybody has his point of view, which is absolutely for him or herself the point of his departure, and we have to understand that. Then I also believe that there are trade opportunities. Also, if you look into environmental challenges, there are opportunities for businesses, for members, and we have to seize them. And that's important that we carve them out and we seize them. And just to react on Gabrielle's remark, we all like, of course, plants, but also animals. And of course, joke aside, we have to look also into the sustainability for humankind as well, because it's something that we need to be able to continue on this planet. Then we have to act, and we have to act on all sides, including on the trade side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Over to you, Ambassador Antas, please.
Thank you. So 3 issues. One, I would like to thank the experts who've given us a lot of information. I'm blessed by listening to the views that have been expressed, and to my colleague ambassadors as well. And in Geneva, it's a lot of resource persons here. Some of the best resources you have in the world live here in Geneva. So I am blessed every time I listen to conversations like this. Thank you very much for that. Secondly, with respect to the geopolitical issues, there's always changes. I think next month, 2 months' time, things will have changed. There are lots of variables in the geopolitical arena. So how we meet them is a challenge that we all have to deal with. And thirdly, on the issue of the COP that Australia is pushing to host, as part of the Australian Pacific hosting the COP, we hope that those countries will support our bid from the Pacific and Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You have the last word, Jeremy.
Double last, thank you. I mean, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and to say that effectively those of us who are supporters of the multilateral system, and I count the people in this room as that, recognise the fact that the WTO is pivotal to addressing some of these challenges. It's important for the WTO, but it's also important more broadly. If we don't have the WTO playing a strong role, then we risk a fragmented approach to climate change, which will sort of undermine the rules-based trading system, but will also undermine global efforts to address climate change. So it's a virtuous circle, but it also represents a sort of Damocles that hanging over our head if we don't get it right. Thanks.
Super. Thank you very much, Jeremy. So just before we close, I wanted to ask you all to thank all of our speakers for having joined us today and for their excellent remarks. I think it's been a great opening to Geneva Trade Week. And I have to say that I am very struck in our work at TESS every day by how it is we can navigate these tremendously complex, tense political times. Geopolitics are tough, economic interests are challenging. We know, meanwhile, that the planet is facing a set of enormous crises that affect all of our welfare, economic welfare, and communities over the long run. So I think today, without trying to summarize a very broad-ranging conversation, what we have heard is that governments and stakeholders are continuing their work. They're continuing to move. Trying to find ways to cooperate internationally is the core business of international cooperation. It's the daily business of keeping on trying. And we may not always be able to run or walk, but we can keep moving. And I think that's what we have to me, that's a tremendously optimistic message from today, is the commitment that the issues still matter, that the purpose of this multilateralism still matters, that the purpose of tackling sustainability issues in all of their 3 dimensions still matters, that we have to find shared interests, we have to find ways to keep on cooperating, and that there's an interest in doing so. That's a tremendously positive message from today's discussion that is not the one would normally get in the news. And I think we have a responsibility to take that story forward while recognizing that, of course, you open the newspaper in the morning and it doesn't look good. But our job is to look forward. And so I'm really excited to have such fantastic colleagues as all of you who are allies in that journey. And wanted to thank you again for taking the time. My colleagues at TESS will be unhappy with me if I don't remind you all that this afternoon we have a roundtable on what's next for international cooperation on sustainable agriculture and trade, which is one of the issues raised today. Our colleagues at ISD have a session this afternoon on trade and industrial policy and sustainability. And then tomorrow we have roundtables on water, trade and sustainability, on circular economy, and on net zero pathways, looking at different sectors and how developing countries will be impacted by the shift to net zero in those. On Thursday, we'll be launching a new publication on accelerating progress on climate, nature, and sustainable development with WWF, which was an effort to sort of come up with the new approaches to the trade and sustainability discussion, bringing in one of the largest environmental players in the world. And then if any of you are interested in points of view that some on the panel have expressed here, I would note that on our Synergies platform at TESS, we have published expert views by, I think, almost all on this panel around different aspects of the trade and sustainability issue. So that's all from us. Thank you again for taking time to be with us today. Thank you those who joined online. Thank you to Trevor for being up in the middle of the night. And a big thank you to our friends at Geneva Trade Platform and Dmitry and colleagues for making this possible. Thank you very much.